I would like just to preface my discussion by saying that you will not hear anything new from me about low carbon options. But what I thought I should do is just talk to you from a sub-Saharan Africa point of view, if you like, about the challenges that we are facing. So you will not hear any mind-blowing technology that we're talking about. It's not as if we do not have the technology. We do have the technology, but it's a matter of implementing it. And we've been talking, we should be implementing instead of talking. Basically, I'll just talk through the background in our context, and then look at the options, and then the way forward. So much energy, so little power. That is the story of the African continent. We have just about, if not all, the energy resources in abundance, for that matter. But we have got very little power, very little electrical power. It is a sad situation. Only a small amount of the resources have been exploited. Electricity penetration in this region is 20% on average, with ranges from 80% with countries like South Africa and other countries going down as low as 15%. So we're dealing with a huge backlog. Large investments are required for the transmission and distribution infrastructure. I speak about infrastructure because although we can talk about distributed generation in many instances, we have no other way but to have some form of infrastructure for the simple reason that usually the infrastructure issues are linked. You need road infrastructure, you need to be able to transport goods and services across the country, and you need to have the infrastructure for hospitals and so on. So we cannot avoid any form of infrastructure, even if we have a distributed generation. It is estimated that about 160 gigawatt grid is targeted for by the year 2025 in that region, and it requires 40 billion to 50 billion capital. The target is to electrify 130 million using the grid and 75 million off-grid. We have extensive geography. The good Lord has blessed us with a lot of land, but therein lies our weakness, because then we need to have long transmission lines, and this obviously has got problem with losses. This is why people talk about now distributed generation, so that we don't have to have generation, centralized generation. But I think we'll have to have a bit of both. Our demand basically exceeds the supply, hence the unreliability. Many experts come to our region and prescribe solutions. We just heard from Mr. Yobe now that there are two different worlds. The world that has got 100% penetration, that are looking at decarbonization, and then the world that does not have, or the very little electrification. We are generally technology followers, but this does not mean that we are not innovative. We can innovate on existing technology. That's the best, essentially the background. Now, the low carbon opportunities that we have at our disposal is hydro. And with hydro, we would need to have a regional approach, because the rivers invariably lie within borders. You take an example of the Zambezi River, which basically has got 3 or 4 countries that it's talking about. So a regional approach is required. And we also need the regional approach in the sense that in some instances we've got lots of hydro potential, like in the DRC, but other countries like Botswana and Namibia do not have the same, but we can then transmit the power from DRC to these countries. Renewables, without question, have got to be part of the future. Um, we still have problems with technology issues. As Philippe said, any form of power is better than no power. You can have 8 hours of power, as he said earlier on. It's better than not having any power. So the luxury of saying we want reliable power that is there 24/7, in some instances, is really a luxury. Nuclear is one area that it seems people shy away from, and for some unknown reason, it seems that the African continent is destined not to go that route. We generally find it's a little bit somewhat patronizing when developed countries that have got nuclear infrastructure are lecturing us on and telling us, you don't need that, you should just do renewables. Gone are the days where we should be looking at ourselves as a developing region and just look at rooftop solar panels so that we can generate enough electricity to watch a television, so that we can watch Manchester United play. We would like to have electricity that can industrialize and manufacture for ourselves, and it's very difficult for us to look at that without looking at hardcore infrastructure. And we think that nuclear is one of the ways that we can actually solve the problem. Small modular reactors can really become a game changer. I think the expert on nuclear will probably talking a lot more in detail about that. But from the point of view of the licensing, this probably will solve the problem for the continent. Centralized generation still has potential. We heard that 75% of the world will be urbanized by the year 2050. It's very difficult to supply a population of 11 million people as in Bangalore using rooftops and wind power only. You have to have some concentrated generation, especially if there's going to be industries as well. Way forward, the AU has got a 2063 agenda, a global strategy to optimize use of Africa's resources for the benefit of all Africans. African solutions for African challenges. That's where the innovation comes from. We need to innovate because some of the problems that we have are somewhat unique. I was attending a conference last year where people were lamenting and saying, in many of these places on the continent, African continent, we have got highly trained town planners who have got no jobs to do. They do the planning for urbanization settlements, but the plans are shelved. The planning for urbanization is done by squatters. The squatters decide we are going to sit here, we are going to build our shacks here, we are going to build our informal settlements. The politicians come and demand from the utilities, provide water and electricity to these people, because therein lies the votes. So we have got a situation where we are unwittingly allowing squatters to do our town planning. And when we fly into London or Tokyo and we see fantastic infrastructure, we start wondering what's wrong with us. It's because we do not do the town planning properly. We do not use the professionals to do that. We allow squatters to do the planning for us. The idea of an energy mix is absolutely essential. I think at this point, when there's all these debates about what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, it is imperative that if you've got a 20% electricity penetration rate, you cannot afford the luxury of saying, we cannot look at coal. We need all forms of energy on the continent. Low carbon still, but we need it. We need to have regional cooperation for our development. There's no question about that. Interconnectivity, power pooling. As I mentioned earlier on, you may have some countries that have got big hydro potential and should be able to develop and sell the power to neighboring countries. And for that matter, even export to Europe. I mean, There's nothing wrong with countries in the northern part of Africa selling power to Europe, hydropower, that is. And then, of course, distributed generation that we spoke about earlier on. We do not, in my view, have an alternative except to still be talking about large infrastructure development. The head of IMF, Mrs. Lagarde, is on record as saying the African continent requires major infrastructure development. That includes electricity infrastructure as well. Yes, distributed generation is a good idea to have, but we need both. Funding is the key issue, and when we say funding, we do not necessarily mean foreign aid. We can direct some of the funds that we have in our own countries and do that. Just as an example of what South Africa looks like in terms of the energy mix, to emphasize the point that I made earlier on. And thank you.